Mini sermon. Whenever I read this verse, my mind automatically goes to the Left Behind book and movie series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. For those who are lucky enough to have never heard about this series, Left Behind takes place after the true and faithful Christians are taken up to heaven, and it follows a group of people who, having been left behind, become born-again Christians as they seek to remain faithful to God in the midst of severe persecution and the rise of the Antichrist. Now I can see how horrible that theology is, not to mention very thin basis biblically. But back then, it made perfect sense. But now looking back, the way hope was presented is pretty troubling. Hope in this mindset is a zero-sum game. Christianity was about being on the winning side and avoiding the wrath of God. Christians run because everyone else, people of different faith traditions, atheists, mainline Christians who we viewed as lukewarm, queer people, etc., lost. But what type of hope is this? What kind of hope relies on the condemnation and suffering of the majority of humanity in order to thrive? Where is the good news in this gospel? Thankfully, rapture theology is in fact fairly new and can be traced to the 19th century. Meaning most Christians haven't interpreted these verses in the ways that Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins have. But to be sure, early Christians did believe in the return of Jesus as a time of judgment. But what did this judgment consist of? First, the judgment was often tied to the destruction and fall of the Roman Empire and the religious institutions that worked with said empire. The Gospel of Matthew and the other Gospels, in their unique ways, often contrasted the Empire of Rome with the kingdom of God. God's kingdom was one of justice and equity, while the Roman Empire was rightfully described as unjust, cruel, and violent. For early Jesus followers, the judgment of God wasn't about being raptured up into the sky while everyone else is left on earth to suffer, but it was about God's kingdom being implemented here on earth. I do want to point out one difference between the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew. In the Gospel of Mark, God's coming reign is described in much more immediate language. The author and its listeners assumed that the fall of Rome and the coming of God would come during their lifetime. But Matthew's approach is different. The Gospel of Matthew advocates for a stay awake and watch approach. Matthew is much more careful to note that no one knows when the judgment will come, only that it will come. Matthew takes on the approach that points out the ways in which the kingdom of God has already manifested itself through the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus, while acknowledging that the fullness of the kingdom of God has not yet come. This section is a call to both acknowledge and hold on to the work God has already done in this world, and a call to keep watch and to keep working.